The Historical Society of Ottawa acknowledges that as we share these stories from our past, we are on what remains the unceded land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode. This series is a collaboration between the Historical Society of Ottawa and Rogers TV. I'm Ben Weiss. I'm with the Historical Society of Ottawa, where we've been telling Ottawa's great stories since 1898. If you find Ottawa's history as fascinating as we do, I urge you to check out our website, our monthly speaker series, and follow us on Facebook, and enjoy today's segment.
Hi, my name is Glenn Crawford, and I'm here today because I'm a historian and researcher for the Village Legacy Project, which documents the LGBTQ plus community in Ottawa. The reason I got involved in history really was because I was born in Edmonton, but I moved here with my family in Ottawa when I was 3, and I grew up in the suburb of Canada. And it was not a very friendly place for someone like me growing up. I was bullied, as many people in our community were. And I really had no kind of idea or awareness of what was sort of available in terms of services and sort of a burgeoning LGBTQ community. So I took a long time really to come out. I came out when I was actually 28. And I didn't even have my first boyfriend until I was 29. And so it took me a while really to sort of understand and be aware that there's, you know, this whole other community that was happening, and all of the sort of history, culture, and activism that was happening all around me, primarily in Centretown, of course. And it wasn't really until I got a job at Capital Extra, which was an LGBTQ plus paper that existed in Ottawa. And when I got in that job, it sort of opened my eyes really to everything that was kind of available. I got to meet a lot of interesting people and interview them, and really learn about about the history, things that maybe I had read about, you know, sort of generally in sort of queer history, sort of North American Western queer history, but really kind of learned about what was happening locally, and met some, as I say, some amazing people who really started organizations and were kind of on the front lines of activism. And so I had that job for about a year and a half, and as I say, it was kind of my entree into the community. And it was sort of the tail end, I guess you could say, of the queer liberation movement, and sort of what I would call a golden age of activism. And that was roughly around the early 2000s when that sort of happened. And basically, when equal marriage happened in 2005, it started to change kind of really what the community was. And obviously things became more online, and so a lot of the businesses and organizations that were available in Ottawa were slowly starting to disappear. And it wasn't really until I received was given an opportunity to do a request for proposal with the organization that's now the Centretown BIA. And they were looking to do sort of public art on the street, along Bank Street, for the, you know, sort of documenting historical incidents in Ottawa, specifically to the queer community. And I applied for that and received that opportunity, and that's really how the Village Legacy Project started. And it gave me an opportunity to basically for about a year do research to create a website and create documentaries, doing interviews, researching, looking for photographs, to really, as I say, sort of document and present the history to our community. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this history is not something that's taught in schools. It's not something that's sort of readily available. And it's a living history. The people who, as I say, I met in my job in Capital Extra, you know, many of them were still living, and were still able to sort of tell their stories and talk about the work that they did during that sort of critical time. So that's really kind of my entree in how I got involved in it, and you know, why why I was sort of passionate about it. As I say, I grew up in a small suburb of Ottawa, and I didn't really have access to those services. So I really wanted to make sure that that history was available for people, so that younger generations would have that available to them, and sort of learn from it. Because as we're seeing, there is sort of a rise in sort of right-wing, you know, sort of even fascism that's happening in the United States, that's really sort of targeting many communities, including our own. And that is, of course, creeping up into Canada as well. So, you know, it's important to remain vigilant and to know our history, so that we can learn from our past and you know, hopefully educate our younger generations who have the energy and the fight to take on new causes that are happening in our community. So I'll talk a little bit about that history itself to sort of educate you in terms of some of the things that I learned. So if we go back to, probably a lot of people have heard of the Stonewall riots, which happened in 1969, happens to be the year that I was born in. So it gives you an idea of, you know, how recent all of this history is. Not to say that I'm super young, but it's within my lifetime anyway. And basically, we didn't have our Stonewall in Canada until 1971, a couple of years later. And that was the first ever demonstration that happened in Canada. It's called We Demand. It happened here in Ottawa. There was a sister demonstration that happened in Vancouver also. And it wasn't particularly well attended. There were maybe about 100 people. It was pouring rain. It was a miserable day. And people who were involved were, you know, sort of working class, blue collar people who were, you know, sort of, if you think of that time period, sort of the early 70s, there was a lot of civil rights you know, activism happening with the sort of Black civil rights movement, the feminist movement. And this was one of many movements that were sort of happening in that time. And a lot of the people who were involved in queer activism were also involved in some of these other fights. So the people who attended this demonstration really didn't have a strong, you know, sense of its, you know, significance or importance until it actually, you know, people started looking back at the history and realizing, oh yeah, this is a significant event because it was the first of its kind. And basically, this happened in August 28th, I believe, of 1971. It happened on Parliament Hill. The speechwriters of the main speech were Herb Spears and David Newcomb, I believe. And they were Toronto-based. But they had trouble getting to the event itself. Herb Spears, who was slated to speak, on the way here to Ottawa, he actually got in a car accident. And so a local person by the name of Charlie Hill ended up becoming the person who read the speech. And this speech is actually readily available online. You can see at least snippets of it through the CBC archives, which was fascinating to watch if you ever get the opportunity to do so. And basically the demands were, you know, sort of basic civil rights, you know, making sure that people weren't being fired from the jobs, custody rights for children if the parents were divorcing. This was particularly important and impactful for the lesbian community or bisexual women, because the courts would actually give the custody of children to the father. Even if he was abusing the children, abusing the wife, it didn't matter. What was considered worse was being raised in a lesbian household. So these kinds of issues were, really sort of impactful on people's everyday lives. The discrimination was sort of baked into our laws, and people could get away with kicking us out of our homes, and so on and so forth. Now, a couple years earlier in 1969, Pierre Elliott Trudeau famously said there's no place in the nation for, or in the bedrooms of individuals. I butchered that that phrase, but essentially that's the sentiment. And what happened was an omnibus bill that got passed that actually decriminalized homosexuality. But as I say, that decriminalization didn't actually change the laws. And so most people's lives weren't particularly affected by the decriminalization. And so there were, further fights that had to be, fought hard and won. So a lot of things were sort of happening. After this demonstration, a small group of individuals created a sort of the first organization in Ottawa called Gays of Ottawa. It's changed its name over time to include the lesbian, bisexual, and trans communities. But it started off as Gays of Ottawa. And it was basically, sort of not only sort of fighting sort of the laws and lobbying and so on and so forth, but it was also, as it was sort of gaining new membership, it was kind of dealing with the internalized homophobia that would come from all of this sort of discrimination that happened. People sort of internalize these things and are closeted, fearful of coming out. For a variety of reasons. They could lose their families, they could lose their children, they could lose their jobs, they could be ostracized by their families. And so it was really important to sort of deal with those kind of internal struggles and fears of sort of coming out. And there was a lot of actually resistance even within our own community. People were resistant to change. Some people were able to sort of exist in this kind of double life. And so their philosophy was sort of don't rock the boat. If we sort of raise awareness of our existence, then it puts us potentially in harm's way, not sort of seeing the potential for actually making, significant inroads and changes, not only in the laws, but also in public perception. And, and Ottawa had sort of faced a specific sort of challenge because, of course, we're the home of the federal government, being the national capital. And this gets into what's sort of now known as the Purge, which was a systematic sort of witch hunt, really, of people who were, queer, who might be working in the military or other branches of the government. And basically roughly 9,000 people were interrogated and questioned regarding their sexuality. And it was, a very sort of difficult time, a fearful time. Many people lost their jobs as a result. One sort of famous thing that was happening was the man by the name of Wake, who was a professor at Carleton University, was developing ways to try and actually find out who, in fact, was LGBTQ within the government. And he developed this machine, which now sort of colloquially is called the fruit machine. And basically it was a way to try and test people to find out if they were actually queer. And the way that it worked was a person would be interrogated, brought into a dark room, and they would be hooked up to a machine that measured your pupil dilation. And the room was dark, and what would happen is they would flash images or slides various things, some innocuous, like, you know, pictures of houses, families, trees, and then all of a sudden you would get this flash of perhaps a naked man or a naked woman. And the idea was to see if your pupils would dilate, you know, effectively for desire of this sort of instinct of desire for this photograph. But of course, it never really worked because you're in a dark room, you're being flashed lights, and so naturally your pupils dilated at all the pictures, so this particular thing was scrapped. But it sort of illustrates how significant and how serious these witch hunts were. Now, a famous drag queen in Ottawa by the name of Peaches Latour was actually brought in by the RCMP and shown binders and binders of people who the RCMP had been spying on, taking pictures of, sometimes going into bars that were known to be to have, you know, gay and lesbian attendees, and they would actually snap photographs. You would hide behind newspapers with holes cut in it, if you can believe it, and take photographs. And so Peaches was shown all of these binders of all of these people that they'd been trying to identify, and was asked to sort of name names. And Peaches refused to do so, and the officer at the time had said that you know, to do so would be to be a traitor to your country. And Peaches replied that I'd rather be a traitor to my country than a traitor to my friends and community. So, but unfortunately, a lot of other people didn't have these kind of options, and as I say, many people were sort of rooted out of the government and fired, or just sort of lived in this sort of culture of fear of being discovered. And this hunt actually happened all the way up until the 1990s. It's still quite recent history. So many people in the government still talk about sort of the ripples of what that purge actually meant to them, and meant to sort of creating kind of a culture of fear within many branches of the government. Even though people obviously are not discriminated openly, they still sort of have that sort of concern of being open and out, and, you know, is it going to affect my job, you know, potential for promotions, and so on and so forth. So these kinds of things were some of the battles that our community were facing. Another thing that we were facing were hate crimes. And a lot of men particularly would participate in activities called cruising. They would go into parks or bathrooms or, you know, any place that was kind of dark and relatively private, and try to you know, connect and find other men, often for sex, obviously, but also just connecting, finding community. Many of these people might be married or might have you know, just as I say, a job where they're afraid to sort of go into known queer spaces. And so this was an opportunity for them to fulfill their sexual desires and also potentially increase their social network. But this created, you know, other dangers. Policemen, if they sort of knew that these places existed, would, you know, sort of entrap or bash people who were participating in cruising. And it also became known, certain places became known particularly even to the mainstream community. And typically young teenage men would go out and, as they called it, roll a queer, which meant that they would either rob or assault or even murder people who were in these sort of parks. And a famous example of this happened in 1989. There was a murder spree that was actually happening in Majors Hill Park, which is behind the Chateau Laurier near the Parliament buildings. And many people were being thrown off the cliff. I even, in my research, spoke to somebody who was attacked. He went to the park with his bicycle, and this young man basically threatened him and threw the bike over the cliff, and sort of gave him this sort of stern warning that next time he would be the thing that would be thrown off the cliff. But as I say, it sort of culminated in this particular night of terror in 1989 when a young man by the name of Alain Brousseau, who actually happened to be straight, was a worker at the Chateau Laurier, and he lived in what was then Hull, now Gatineau. And so he would cross the Alexandria Bridge every night to get home after his job. And a group of young men, about 5 or 6 young men, basically followed him and chased him, catching up with him on the actual bridge itself, and dangled him over the edge of the bridge and threw him off to his death. And this, unfortunately, they weren't finished. They decided that in this sort of night of, as I say, terror, for fun for them, they decided to, one of them had mugged somebody earlier and had that person's wallet, and so they were able to know where this person lived. So they went to his home in Orleans, where he and his partner were sleeping. This was in the middle of the night. And they broke into the house and assaulted them quite violently. Luckily, they had both survived, but the attack was brutal and vicious. And this night of sort of violence and activity finally kind of prompted the police to actually recognize that there were all of these cases of people being thrown off, beaten up, mugged, murdered. And which at the time they were denying was targeted to the queer community and were hate crimes. But this particular incident was the one that sort of made the connection that at last, yes, these were hate crimes, and this came out in the testimony at the trial of these young individuals. So this sort of hatred and prejudice was something that our community suffered through, and were sort of difficult. But there was also a lot of fun that happened. Businesses, bars opened up in the area, and despite things like the HIV/AIDS epidemic, which happened in the 1980s, and organizations that formed because of that, there, as I say, were opportunities to, as our community was growing and more sort of organizations were formed, there were opportunities for dances, for bars opening up, and even small businesses like a bookstore and other places that became really social places for people to connect. And all sorts of social services opened up to the community as well. So really, our community history is fascinating. This is really only a fraction of, of what I could talk about today, but I'll wrap it up here just to sort of say that I encourage you to go to our website, which is villagelegacy.ca, and you can find out all this history and much, much more. See documentaries, archival photographs, and all I can say is it's been sort of an honor and a privilege to preserve this history, and as I say, to have it for future generations, so people can learn more and be aware of the issues that we might be facing now in our community. So thanks very much.